Should you homeschool your kids? That's the question of the day. My name is Jackie, and I am the founder of HomeSchool ThinkTank and host of the HomeSchool ThinkTank parenting podcast and video channel. So what I want to do today is help bring up some considerations that you should think about before deciding if homeschooling is the right choice for your family. So I'm going to briefly go over the 7 points that we're going to discuss today, and then we'll go into further depth on each of those aspects. So number 1 is lifestyle. Number 2 is relationships. Number 3 is socialization. Number 4 is education. Number 5 is time. Number 6 is finances. And then finally, we're going to talk about responsibility. So on the surface, that doesn't say a lot, but this is the outline that we're going to go through, and I'll explain as we go along. By the way, I want you to know there is an article that goes with this video or podcast episode, so definitely check the link beneath this video to see that article. Now, if you're watching this on Homeschool Think Tank's website, then you're in the right place. All right, first thing, lifestyle. So homeschooling is a lifestyle. And while people, when they're thinking about homeschooling, they're really just thinking about education usually, about school, but homeschooling. Really, it is not just about education. It really is an entire lifestyle. It will change the way you can live. When you homeschool your kids, you have location freedom and you have time freedom. So you can travel when and where you want, and you can do school in the hours that work for your family, whether it's daytime, evening, weekends, it doesn't really matter, so long as the law wherever you live permits that. And in most places, they're not specific about the time of day that school has to happen. But there are a few places, so always know the law where you live. But that is a really important aspect to consider. It is truly just an entirely different lifestyle than when your children go to school. Because if you think about that, your entire calendar revolves, or your entire schedule revolves around the school calendar when your children are in school. So from the overall year, when you can take vacations, to the actual hours of each day when your children are in school. These are the hours they have to be there, so your life revolves around that. And then if there's homework in the evening, your life revolves around that. Whereas when you homeschool your children, you have a lot of flexibility. All right, so that's the first thing, is lifestyle. All right, the next thing that I want to discuss with you is relationships, because homeschooling will impact your relationships with your children, with your spouse, with other people, and you need to give this some consideration. So first and foremost, you need to be really honest with yourself and decide if you really like spending large amounts of time with your children. And that matters, because as a homeschooling parent, you are going to be spending massive amounts of time with your kids, and that should be enjoyable for all of you. So if you're a parent who doesn't really want to spend 12 hours a day with your kids or 16 hours a day, probably homeschooling is not for you. Now, I will say your kids are going to be involved in other things, so long as you get them involved in other things. They're going to still have their own lives. It's not like you have to be together all the time, but there will be days when you're just like home all day long with your kids, and that needs to be appealing to you. So if that is just a flat out no for you, you need to hang up the idea of homeschooling right now. But if overall you really enjoy spending time with your kids, then homeschooling might be for you. All right. The next thing I want you to consider is how much time you, as the parent, need alone. If you need 6 hours a day to yourself, homeschooling is probably not for you. If you need a couple of hours alone each day, I feel like that is possible. You might be able to figure that out. Whether it's like an hour in the afternoon, your kids have quiet time in their rooms where they do their own thing and you have some time, or your spouse gives you some time while you go work out in the evening or the early morning. I feel like a couple hours a day is doable for many people. Maybe not for all people, but for many people. I know, especially when I had just one child, I was able to carve out a couple of hours alone for myself each day. I guess especially when she was younger, because she would nap. But even aside from that, she might be playing, and back then I would scrapbook a lot. So I would go down to the basement and scrapbook or whatever. But I think it's possible, but you're going to have to plan it out. And, I'm also thinking, I used to take painting classes when my kids were younger, but my husband was really supportive. So I could carve out some time alone for myself, or to do what I wanted to do. But I do think you're going to need a supportive spouse, grandparents, friend, somebody, if you wanted a couple hours. I feel like an hour most people can do. And you might disagree with me, but if you really give it some thought and really try, you might be able to do it. Okay. Next thing is, do you have consistent and reliable support? I am here to tell you, you need that as a homeschooling parent. You are not a hero. You are a human. You are not some superpower. You are very human, and you do need support. So you're going to need support to get time alone or time away from the kids, because that's healthy to have time to yourselves and for your kids to not always be with you. You're going to need some support with housekeeping, because when your kids are home day in and day out, especially when they're really young and they're not overly helpful yet, that is a job. It is a lot of work to keep up with all of the meals and their education and the housekeeping and the shopping and the dental appointments. Homeschooling your kids is a full-time job, and you need to have some support in place. If you don't feel like you have emotional and physical support, I would think twice before homeschooling your kids. All right, next I want to visit with you about homeschooling and socialization. So socialization is always something that comes up with people who don't know anything about homeschooling. And I am here to tell you, it is very possible for you to have really well socialized kids. Where I live, there are more homeschooling activities than I could possibly have my children involved in. And that may be the case for you as well. If it's not, you are completely capable of starting a homeschooling group, of getting something going, and I can help you with that if that's something you need help with. But here's sort of the difference between socialization when your kids go to school and socialization with homeschooling. When your kids go to school, they're in a classroom environment, and it's a constant raising of hands to speak, and okay, you're being socialized to follow rules there, but it's not like conversational as much, right? But then they have maybe recesses where there's a little bit of time for socialization. And I used to be a physical education teacher in a public school. I am very well aware of how that is. It's not that much time. And many schools have taken recess away altogether anymore. So at school, there's really not a lot of opportunities for great socialization. And also the thing that happens in school is it's really unnatural if you think about it. All the kids are the same age. In the real world, we are all different ages intermingling together, and that's how it is for homeschoolers. When you go to a homeschooling group, there are little kids to teenagers, and they are interacting together, and sometimes the teenagers are leading something, helping the younger kids, and sometimes the teens are off doing their own thing and the younger kids are doing things, but usually, pretty much always, there is a mix of age groups, and that's actually really natural. Kids learn from each other, and it's a good thing. Also, when you homeschool your kids, they tend to be out and about in the world with you more. So they're getting socialization, everything from your basic shopping to appointments to, I don't know, going to a grandparent's home or some field trip. But there's a lot more opportunity for socialization because your kids are actually with you and interacting with the real world. So, whereas in a school environment, it's very constrained to that environment. Also, when you homeschool your kids, there's less bullying, less peer pressure. So your kids just don't experience that as much. And I'm not going to say there's no bullying. Sometimes there's bullying even in a homeschool group. And it's good for your kids to learn how to deal with people who aren't being great. So that's okay if they have to deal with that sometimes, but you don't want them to deal with it day in and day out. So I think homeschooling is really great in that regard. All right, homeschooling and education. This is the next component here. And clearly you're thinking about your child's education when you're homeschooling, because like I said, that's usually why people are looking at homeschooling, is they don't want their kids in public school, so they're looking at other educational options for homeschooling. And if you learn anything with HomeSchool ThinkTank, there are hundreds of, well over 100 podcast episodes. There's lots of videos, lots of blog posts on our website. This is something I try to drive home so frequently, is there is a difference between education and schooling. And homeschooling is not about schooling, but it is about education. It is about family. It is about learning. It is about community. So separate in your mind school and education. They are different. That is a really strong start to getting off with homeschooling, because here's what most people start doing when they homeschool, is they start out by trying to emulate the public school system in their home. So they're doing quote unquote school at home. And over time, what happens is you realize what an artificial setup that is. And you start focusing more on education, on helping your children learn, than on having these completely segmented subject areas. And not to say that you may still have subject areas you're doing, but you tend to merge these things together more. Like sometimes people do more of a project-based learning approach or a unit studies approach. And you find that children learn better when they're connecting the dots, because things go together, versus learning this subject over here and this subject over here and this subject over here, but we're not necessarily studying anything that intermingles together. Things make more sense for kids when there are dots that connect. Okay, also, as far as education goes, I think it's really important for the homeschooling parent to have a love of learning, to have a sense of curiosity, to ask questions aloud, to look for answers, to research, to read, because what you're doing is you're setting a good example for your kids for what learning looks like. So this is actually a really important question to ask yourself if you're going to homeschool, is truly like, do I love learning? Because if you don't love learning, it's going to be really difficult to model that for your children. And your children need to have that as a role model, a parent who loves to learn, a parent who's inquisitive, who tries to figure things out, who's resourceful, who asks questions. So if you don't really love learning, I'm going to suggest that maybe homeschooling isn't for you, because not only are you modeling this for your children, but you are going to be learning throughout your years as a homeschooling parent, because you will always be figuring things out so that you can help your children. So you need to enjoy learning. And I do believe that maybe even if it's not innate for you, if it's not something that you've developed already, I don't necessarily think you have to hang up the idea of homeschooling if you're willing to create a love of learning within yourself, if you're willing to step into that. but you've got to be willing to do that, I think, to homeschool effectively. Okay, now let's talk about time. This is actually a huge, huge component that you need to consider when homeschooling your kids. Homeschooling does take time. You know, sometimes people think you can do it in about 2 hours a day, which I think is totally possible, but it depends on how you structure your days and how your children learn and their personalities. There are a lot of things to consider. But so there's the time it takes to homeschool, but also, sort of like I stated earlier, you're intermingling homeschooling with taking care of yourself, with preparing meals for your family, with doing the shopping, with the errands, with just all of your life. So there's a lot there. And I think, especially if you've been a working parent, when you go to homeschooling your kids, you're just going to feel like there's this luxurious amount of time. But what's funny is you'll find there's so much time, and simultaneously the time slips away so quickly. And you have to be really intentional about your time. You need to have a plan for your time. You need to be willing to reflect on the time that you've spent in the past and look at what's working and what's not working for your household in general and for your children's education. You also need to be really good at setting boundaries, because other people, whether it be a spouse, your mother, friends, just other people in general, will look at you and think, oh, she has time to do that. And they'll ask you to babysit. They'll ask you to do whatever thing over here. They'll stop by. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if you want to say yes to it and you feel like you have the time. But I would caution you to not be a people pleaser. You have to have boundaries, and you have to be able to kindly tell people no. No is like a golden word if you're a homeschooling parent, because people will just ask you for the things because you're the person who doesn't have a job. But I'm telling you, homeschooling your kids is a full-time job and then some. So you have to set boundaries. Now, I want to share with you, I am a certified life coach. I'm also a homeschool consultant. So I help parents. I offer individual coaching services, and I have a group program for homeschooling parents where I help you with homeschooling, and I also help you with your everyday life things like setting boundaries, like making a plan, like reflecting on what's worked in the past and hasn't, and so that you can take that knowledge and improve your future. So I want to encourage you to sign up for a consultation with me, because I can help you with time management in a big way. All right, I want to talk about money with you, about finances and homeschooling. Homeschooling costs money, period. You will spend money homeschooling your children. Now, how much money you spend is completely up to you. But I want to share with you, before I go into the expenses of homeschooling, I want to ask you to consider, you spend money on your kids going to school as well. You spend money on public education and you spend money on private education. I'm going to look at my list here and read to you some of this, because these are costs associated with your kids going to school. So, and now I want to say some of these costs will also be applicable if you homeschool your kids, but these are all costs with just going to school, public or private. So if your kids go to school, you will have costs for gas, fuel to and from the school, school uniforms, or possibly trendy clothing, because when all the other kids are wearing that, your kid wants it too. You'll have special class fees, assembly fees, lunch money, school pictures, beginning of the year supplies, the backpacks and the notebooks and the specific notebooks and folders and tissue and disinfectant wipes, all of these different things that the school requires you bring in for the beginning of the year. You have those fees, which we all know that can end up being a few $100s. Gym uniforms, musical instruments, yearbooks, school sports fees, after school activities, just school fees, like they just charge you fees for this and that. Possibly laptop, maybe included with the school, or there may be a rental or fees, printer fees, even if it's just at home because your kids have to print paper or, print some of their work, paper, after school tutoring perhaps. I call this one keeping up with the Joneses. So whatever the other kids are doing, your kids might want to do that too. So those expenses happen. And what else, right? Just sit back and think about it. There are plenty of fees associated with going to school. Now, a lot of those fees are also associated with homeschooling. Now, here are some of the additional costs on top of those things that you will have with homeschooling. You will be purchasing curriculum and books. Now, let me say with those things, you can actually lower your costs on that a lot by buying used curriculum or used books or going to your local library. And also you can use free or very inexpensive online curriculum as well. All right, with homeschooling, there may be homeschool group or co-op fees, class fees, tutoring, field trip expenses because you'll be going on field trips, art supplies, school supplies. So that seems, I feel like that's about it, but I'm sure I've left a few things out. So if I've left some things out, definitely add those things in the comments, whether it's for school fees or for homeschooling fees, because it helps people really consider this. Now, I'm going to tell you the most expensive aspect of homeschooling is possibly giving up one income. So if I know for me, when I chose to become a stay-at-home mom, and I did that when my kids were born, we gave up, 35, 40 grand a year because I was no longer going to be teaching physical education at the local school. And that was a huge pay cut, and we really had to watch our money because we did not have a big budget. So now we had already gotten used to that, and I just stepped into homeschooling, and so it wasn't a huge change at the time of homeschooling, but I did have a huge pay cut. But I also looked at it like, well, there'd be daycare, and really I just wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. It was like, if I couldn't be a stay-at-home mom, in our instance, I didn't want to have kids. But that was our choice. Okay, the final thing I want to mention to you is, as a really big consideration for homeschooling your kids, is you have 100% complete responsibility for your child's education. And that can be really empowering and really daunting all at the same time, because it's exciting to think about how you could educate your children differently. Oh, and I want to mention, in the article that goes with this video and podcast episode, there is a link near the bottom of the article about different styles of homeschooling. And I think that will just open up your mind to what homeschooling could look like, because it doesn't have to look like it does in school. Education and learning are important, but schooling, not so much. So, not in my opinion anyway. But you will have 100% responsibility for your children's education, and that is a huge responsibility. And, it's not just their education in that textbook sense, like school sense, but it's like everything. Their socialization, the things they're signed up for, experiences. So you really want to go out of your way to give your children a lot of experiences and that socialization and all of the different things, because it will help with their development. So you got to be pretty committed to homeschool your kids. I think if you're going to homeschool your children, there are at least 3 traits you need to have or develop. And I know I brushed on this a little bit ago, but I'm going to go over it again in case I left something out. Number 1 is resourcefulness. you have to be resourceful as a homeschooling parent. You have to be willing to get the help you need when you need it. You need to figure out how to get that help. You need to ask the questions. You have to be a resourceful parent. Next is thoughtfulness. You have to, and when I say thoughtfulness, it's not like, oh, I got my child a gift. Nothing like that. It's like you need to be willing to sit down and think and reflect on what's working and what's not working in your homeschool environment, and think about why things aren't working and what you can do to make things work. So I really think reflection and thoughtfulness is a huge component to helping you homeschool your kids successfully. All right, finally, you need to have good organizational abilities. Some states have various requirements that you will have to submit, or your kids will have to take certain tests or whatever. So you need to be organized and on time with those types of things and getting those done, and with record keeping. But you also need to be organized with your time so that you educate your children. And you also need to be organized in your space, because you'll go crazy if your house is a disaster all of the time. Everybody's homes are disasters sometimes, but by and large, you need to have a kitchen that functions, because you are living in your kitchen when you homeschool your kids. So you need to have systems in place, systems for the laundry, systems for cleaning up, systems for school. So there are a lot of things going on, and for appointments. So good organization goes a long way. Now, some people just have these character traits. Other times you can just develop them. And again, that is what I help you do. As a certified life coach, I help parents with the day-to-day aspects of homeschooling their children, and I can help you get organized. I can help you plan. I can help you with the reflection aspect of things to figure out what's working and what's not working so that you can homeschool your kids successfully. All right, that's all I have for today. There are many other videos, many other podcast episodes, and many other blog posts that you can check out on Homeschool Think Tank's website. So please go visit homeschoolthinktank.com to learn more about how we serve homeschooling parents. Also, be sure to check the link beneath this video, because there will be more information that you will find useful and helpful. All right, live and learn your way. My name is Jackie, and I am your host of the Homeschool Think Tank Parenting Podcast. Bye-bye.